I am Wendy Underhill. I'm the program manager for NCSL's elections team, and I am here as the host for today's webinar. We do have 3 excellent faculty members who we'll be hearing from in just a few minutes. I want to suggest to all of you who are listening that you don't have to take notes as you go along. You don't have to worry about missing something because we will be posting the entire webinar in about a week, so feel free to sit back and listen. I've looked over the roster of attendees, and I saw that many of you come from states that do already have online voter registration. And if you have some stories or comments from your experiences with it, please do put them in that chat box that you were told about. And then for the others of you who are from states that don't yet have online voter registration, by all means, throw your questions in there. We'll answer some of them probably at the midpoint and then the rest at the end. Okay, thanks. All right. This webinar is indeed all about answering questions, and I've put a few up here. But before we get to those questions, which we'll leave to the faculty, there were 2 thoughts that came to my mind from a policy perspective. The first is that online voter registration has been one policy that's only going in one direction. By that I mean that there are no states that have provided online voter registration and then decided to roll it back. Once it's up and running, it seems as though it's satisfactory. We haven't even seen legislation that would undo it. My second thought is about the topic's subtitle, the bipartisan trend in elections. Unlike many election policies, this one about online voter registration does not seem to have a significant partisan component to it. The first state to offer online registration was Arizona, which we know is reliably Republican, and then the second state was Washington, which is reliably Democratic. In a few moments, I think you're going to get to see a map of the states that have it, and take a moment when you do to look, and you can see that there's great geographic diversity, and also the states are from all across the political spectrum. And in the meantime, I've gathered quotes from 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans that illustrate this bipartisan point. Delegate John Cardin from Maryland is a Democrat, and when he spoke with me, he said that he sees online voter registration as a way to meet people where they are. I think his point there is that many people do conduct much of life's business online, and they expect government services to be there too. And then I had a chance to talk with Senator Scott Newman, a Republican from Minnesota, and he calls online voter registration a good idea. He shared this with NCSL in the context of a disagreement that's going on in Minnesota right now over its brand new online voter registration system, but his point was that the disagreement was not about partisan issues at all. It was about separation of powers. And then I spoke with Representative Sam Hunt some time ago, and he's from Washington. I can almost remember his tone of voice being like, well, of course we have this here, and he calls it very successful. His state has been using it since 2007. Go ahead. And last, Colorado's Secretary of State, Scott Gessler, is a Republican, and he says he's a huge fan of his state's system. And right at the moment, he's got his elections office working on a report about the costs and benefits of online voter registration. And that report will be released in December, we hope, and we will try to have hold of it and make it available to our members. So that's my introduction, other than to introduce the first of our first 2 presenters. Go ahead. Samuel Durheimer is a manager in Pew Charitable Trust Elections Initiatives Program, and he leads specifically the Upgrading Voter Registration portfolio, which, not surprisingly, includes online voter registration. He's frequently called on by state policymakers to come discuss ways to improve their registration systems, and he's a frequent speaker as well on upgrades that will improve access and integrity. So that means that you can ask Sam not only questions about online voter registration, but other registration-related topics as well. And then, Sam, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sean right away, and then I'll turn it over to you. Sean Green is the research manager for the elections initiatives at Pew Charitable Trust, and his work covers all aspects of election administration, not just registration. He's dealt with military and overseas voting, the role of technology to communicate with voters, data to be used for evaluating elections, and, of course, registration. I see Sean's work most frequently in the data dispatches that he puts out, and if you're not receiving those, let me know and we'll make sure that you get those. They're real short and fun bites of information that shed light on challenges faced by election administrators and others around the country. All right, with that, it's off to you, Sam.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Sam Deerheimer with the Pew Charitable Trust. It's really a pleasure to be here speaking with you all. I want to really thank Wendy, Heather, and everyone at the staff of NCSL for calling attention to this issue and giving us a forum to discuss it today. Wendy, I have a tiny bit of bad news for you. We have lost our internet connection, so we are trying to fix that, but we're unable to move our slides right now. If someone on your end could just flip to the state map, that would be fantastic for us, because unfortunately—
Absolutely. Heather's in control.
Wonderful. Sorry about that. So we're here to talk about online voter registration, and what you're seeing right now is a map of the states with online registration. Those are the states that are highlighted in light blue, and the states that have passed enabling legislation, and those are the states in yellow. What we also know is that there are two states that are pushing legislation right now, at least two, Ohio and Pennsylvania, which are not highlighted in the map because they don't have systems yet. And we know that several states have kind of hybrid systems. And for example, DC and Ohio residents, if they're already registered voters, can update their existing voter registration, but those states do not yet allow new registrants to come on and register for the first time electronically. Earlier this year, New Mexico also passed a law that allows for existing voters to update their registration, but does not go as far as to allow online, or I'm sorry, to go as far as to allow new voters to register online. So what we're seeing, and that's all the states highlighted on the map, as well as the states that you don't see on this map that I just discussed, is that online voter registration has been one of, if not the most popular trend in election administration legislation across the country over the past several years. As you can see from the map, it's really impossible to pigeonhole online voter registration to a certain region or political set. As Wendy mentioned earlier, you see regional diversity, you see political diversity, and you even see size diversity of the states that have online voter registration. As Wendy mentioned, online voter registration was born in Arizona back in 2002, and then it wasn't until 2008 that a second state, Washington, followed suit. Since then, in just 5 years, online voter registration has rapidly expanded to 20 states that have either have live systems or have passed legislation and expect to have live systems before the midterms next year. And as I mentioned from conversations with state officials, we know that a handful of states are actually working on building their systems out without the enabling legislation and hope to have those systems live prior to the midterms next year. Now, states are moving to online registration because it's a smart, cost-effective use of resources. Pew's been studying online voter registration since 2008, back when there were only those two states of Arizona and Washington. And we've worked closely with the pioneering states to study the systems and evaluate the usage and effects of moving registration online. Now, if anyone wants to learn more about our studies, I'm going to go over some of the details, but if you'd like to learn a little bit more in depth, please visit our website at pewstates.org/elections. And that's at the bottom right-hand corner of all of our slides if you need to write that down. So the results of our research are really stunning. Online voter registration is more accurate, it's more efficient, and it comes at a lower cost than traditional paper registration practices. We've seen in states that have implemented online registration that online voter registration eliminates sloppy handwriting and reduces data entry errors by letting the voter herself take control of the information in her record. It also gives voters an opportunity to correct errors that may still arise. We've seen in some studies done by the Brennan Center have confirmed that online registrants' information is more accurate than those who register by paper. And perhaps not more important, but an issue that really, really drives home for many state legislators and policymakers is that online voter registration comes in at a lower cost than paper registration. In fact, Pew Research conducted in Maricopa County, Arizona, which is home to Phoenix, found that it cost about 83 cents to process a paper registration form. An online voter registration application cost only 3 cents to process. That savings of about 80 cents per application adds up quickly. And we know that in Maricopa County, just that one county, though it is a large county, saved $1 million compared to what they would have spent processing paper registrations in just 5 years. Other states with online voter registration have reported similar savings. Election officials in Washington save between 50 cents and $2 per electronic registration, depending on the county in which the voter is registering. And the California Secretary of State's office reports that election officials save $2.34 per online registration application. In its first month back in 2012, right before the election, over 1 million Californians registered or updated their registration electronically. So at $2.34 per transaction, the savings to the state were significant. Online registration is also more efficient than paper registration processes. Online voter registration streamlines and upgrades the voter registration process for both voters and election officials. States can then reallocate resources, both financial and staff time, to other pressing issues around the crushing kind of tasks that come right before an election. And finally, voters want this service. Voters are actively looking to conduct registration transactions online. In Maricopa County, over 70% of all registration activity was conducted electronically in 2012. In a national survey Pew conducted this fall, we found that a majority of voters in every age group under 65 went online to answer questions they had about the upcoming elections. And we know that voters who have used online voter registration rate their experience very highly. And surveys we did with voters in Washington and Arizona who registered online for the first time, over 80% said that the process was easy, quick, and convenient. So that's why you see so much color on this map. States are moving registration online to take advantage of these efficiencies and cost savings and to provide their voters a desired service. Now, in our conversations with states across the country, whether it's been Kansas or Oregon, online registration is seen as a good government upgrade to an antiquated paper and mail voter registration system. And that's one of the reasons online voter registration has a bit of a unique standing among common election law legislation. And when you look at this map, it's clear that no regional or partisan agenda pops up. In Utah and South Carolina, legislation for online voter registration was championed by Republicans. In California and in Illinois, it was championed by Democrats. And that's telling. If you consider other trends in election law, even over the past decade, for instance, voter ID or early voting, we know who is lining up to support these proposals regardless of the state or the timing. But the benefits of online voter registration have been documented so clearly, legislation has, in most cases, though not all, transcended partisan divides. We often see larger generational disparities than partisan disparities. Older policymakers in some states have had to kind of been convinced by their younger policymakers that online voter registration is desired by a majority of voters. And if we look at the 15 states in that light blue color that have live systems, we know that 11 of them did pass enabling legislation while 4 did not. And as I mentioned earlier, we know at least a few states do intend to implement online voter registration before next year's midterms without legislation. Now, of those 4 that already implemented systems without enabling legislation, Wendy already noted, so far, none of them have seen those laws repealed, although it is important to note that in Minnesota, the Secretary of State, Mark Ritchie, is being sued for going live without enabling legislation. Secretary of State is fighting that suit, and you know, we are just as interested as everyone else to watch how that plays out. You know, we cannot speak to the legality of whether or not online registration was proper moving forward in Minnesota without legislation, but we can say that in the other 3 states that have implemented online registration without legislation, that that activity has gone on uninterrupted since implementation, and that includes Kansas, where voters have been registering since 2009. So that's a brief overview of the states with online voter registration, a little bit of the why and the how they got there. I look forward to answering questions a little bit later in the webinar, and I'm going to hand the mic back to Wendy now.
Thanks very much, Sam. I do have a question I think you can answer right now. It comes from a legislative staffer asking which are the states that have implemented systems without legislation. So Sam, back to you.
Yeah, so right now, I'm going to keep it to the states that actually have live systems. And Kansas, Nevada, New York, and Minnesota all went live without legislation. And again, you know, every state is a unique snowflake, and they all have their own rules and regulations on how they got there. Minnesota is the only state so far where there has been a challenge to the legality of online voter registration. We've seen no challenge in the other 3 states, as I said, going as far back as 2009 in Kansas.
Thank you. I've got one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Sean. Sam, take us through what it would be like to be a voter and actually register online. Sort of just walk us through what might be expected. Is it complicated? Compare it to getting online for a webinar, please. Thanks.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, it's different in every state, and my colleague Sean Green is going to get into some of those differences. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. And you know, one of the benefits of that is that states can craft online voter registration to fit the systems they already have. I think a great example is whether or not the system lives with the chief election official or with another state agency is going to affect the user interface. So in Arizona, for example, the first state to go live with online registration, the system actually lives with their motor vehicles agency, and that's where the identity verification check happens in their system. So the motor vehicles agency actually kind of defines and maintains the user interface. Washington, the second state to implement online voter registration, that system lives with the Secretary of State. So they make the decisions on what the user interface looks like. But I think common to most states is that there is a sign-on screen. You're going to go on, you're going to enter your name, you may enter your address, but the key pieces that you need are your last name, your date of birth, and almost all states require the last 4 digits of your Social Security or a driver's license number. In most states, that driver's license is going to be required because in most states that have online registration and in the states that have passed enabling legislation but don't yet have systems, the identity check happens with the State Motor Vehicles Association. So in order to register online, you have to have a record with your state motor vehicles agency. So you have to supply your motor vehicle, your driver's license number, or your state ID number. So generally, you're going to submit that information. You're going to hit some kind of submit or enter button. And most of the state systems that I've been walked through are very intuitive. They really walk you right through all the information they need. And really, it's kind of an online form that just populates with each new piece of information it needs from the voter. And they're pretty easy to get through, and that's what we've seen across the states. Again, I'm going to go back to something I said a bit earlier. 80% in both Washington and Arizona of users of those systems said the system was easy, convenient, and that they would recommend to family or friends to register online next time they needed to either register or update their registration. So there's a lot of variance among the states, and that's great so that states can build the systems to fit into the technology they already have. And we're finding that for the most part, voters are not having problems getting through the online application.
Wow. All right. Thank you so much, Sam. Sean, take it away.
Sure, great. Thanks, Wendy, and thanks everyone for joining us on the webinar today. Really happy to be there to share some of our new information. So what I'm going to talk about, and which Sam mentioned briefly, is a survey of the states that we did in May and June of this year that had already implemented online voter registration. So at that point, it was 13 states. So it does not include our colleague from Virginia who's going to be presenting a little later. They implemented it in July, and it does not include Minnesota, which implemented online registration just in the past month or so. I also see some questions popping up on the side that I hope I'm going to be able to answer with some of our survey responses. So just to give you an idea of the lay of the land of what survey information was out there, our colleagues at NCSL were sort of the first ones to start surveying states about issues such as how much it costs to implement online voter registration. And an organization that Sam mentioned earlier, the Brennan Center for Justice out of New York, has also done some research on the benefits of online registration. What we wanted to do is sort of fill in, there was a bit of a gap on information of the how the states were doing this, sort of the nitty-gritty of sort of what platforms were they using, how were they offering it, what steps are voters going to have to use to use the online voter registration system. We thought this could be helpful for the states that are currently using the system to see what other states are doing, and certainly for other states that are thinking of using or going to online voter registration, we thought this would be helpful for them to see. So just so you know, what I'm going to be sharing with you today, we're going to be releasing as a report, hopefully by the end of this year. So this will be, and in that report there will even be more information that I share today. So I hope everyone takes a look at that when it comes out. So as I said, we did this survey in June of this year, and we asked 50 pretty detailed questions of the 13 states, and we got, after a few weeks, responses from all states, which was really, really helpful. Gave us a good idea of sort of what we were looking at. As Sam and Wendy have already mentioned, the first state to roll out was Arizona. And just to give you an idea of how many transactions Arizona has had online, it's been over 4 million in the past decade. And that's people updating their addresses or actually registering for the first time. But then we start talking about how states built these systems. And states took a couple of approaches. Most states, 7 of the 13 states, built their systems in-house, which means they used their in-house IT staff to build these systems. 3 states went with an outside vendor entirely. Then there's 3 states that used a mix of both, their in-house IT staff and outside vendors. And as you've seen, sort of the last point, the average cost was about $240,000 for 11 of these 13 states. Now I'm focusing on 11 of these states because one state, Kansas, told us that their system pretty much didn't cost anything. And then the next state, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, is California. And Sam's already mentioned this, but in California it cost them about $1.8 million to build their system. However, as Sam has already mentioned, the state estimated it saved about $2.34 per online registration when compared with paper registration. If you look at that as a factor in the 1 million online applications they had and about the 1 month they had online voter registration before the 2012 election, and you get a big savings. In fact, you add on top of that the number of mailings they didn't have to send out because of the online voter registration system, and you get a savings at both the state and county level combined of about $2.5 million, and that was just for the last election cycle. We also asked states about how it looked from the voter's point of view, or sort of what we call voter convenience, and what sort of options they provided voters. One thing that most states do is they provide the online voter registration system also in Spanish. And on top of that, Washington actually allows the possibility for people to use the system in Chinese and Vietnamese. Another big thing we heard about was 4 states built their systems allowing them to be optimized for mobile use, so people can use their mobile devices to use the online system. We heard from at least 2 states they want to have this in the near future by next year sometime. And as Sam mentioned, one of the things that all states do is that however states built their interface with the voter, when you get to the end of the registration process as a voter, you're going to get some sort of confirmation screen that says your application has been submitted. And then voters in 5 states, if they're going to be notified in real time if they're already registered. So if you're already in the system, you've forgotten, you try to get in, you're going to be told in these 5 states that you're already registered and you don't need to go any further. And then, of course, we also wanted to look at it from a system management point of view, or what it's like from the election officials' point of view. I think someone has asked a question similar to this in our Q&A section. In most states, in 11 states, a local election official reviews every application that comes through online. In 2 of the states, though, most of the applications go straight into the database unless the online system itself flags something with that application to be flagged for a human check. one thing that every state does, and Sam alluded to this, is that they require that the voter, the registrant, supply their date of birth and supply their driver's license number. 3 states additionally require the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, and 1 state requires the full Social Security number. When it comes to security, and I think our colleague Matt's going to be speaking to this in more detail, most states, you'll see, took a variety of measures. 11 states use their online systems through secure networks. 11 states also use audit logs to track any record of any activity that happens in their system. 10 states provide a warning screen or a warning actually in the online process for a voter that says fraudulent registration activity is a criminal act, and the applicant can, before the applicant complete that transaction. And 9 states use encryption of data to protect the data when it's being transmitted electronically. Most importantly, what we heard from states is that no one had reported a serious security breach. We also wanted to hear from states what they thought were the top benefits of online voter registration, and pretty much every state cited 3 of the big things that Sam's already talked about at the beginning, which is cost savings, greater voter satisfaction, and reduced burdens on election officials. We also heard from 9 states that OVR led to more accurate voter records, and from 7 states that it would lead to reduced opportunity for fraud. And finally, what I sort of want to end on is sort of the recommendations and experiences of these states, what we heard from them. We asked them, you know, what would they do differently? What would they recommend to states that are considering moving to online voter registration? And while online voter registration has been working well, I think states have had some lessons learned as well they wanted to share. And that some of those, when you're building your online system, is to make sure to optimize how many web browsers it can be used on. 4 states specifically mentioned challenges when coordinating with their state motor vehicle agencies. In some cases, that was just difficulty being able to actually get in touch with, work with those agencies, and in other cases, it was difficulties in getting their computer systems, the DMV, and the voter registration systems to talk. 1 state specifically mentioned that they had done some pre-launch testing, but they wish they'd actually done some more, and recommend that all states that roll it out do some pretty serious online testing and pushing on the system before it's rolled out. And finally, as I alluded to before, sort of the most common upgrades that states are looking to move to in the near future is making sure that they can move, that people can use these systems on their mobile devices, and they recommend that when states are building their systems now, that simultaneously they build it, that they can be allowed for mobile devices. And additionally, they want to add more language options. So as I mentioned, this is part of there are other questions we asked during the survey. You know, for more information just on this and on other voter registration information, you can go to www.pewstates.org/elections. As I mentioned, though, we're going to be releasing a report on this survey, and then hopefully by the end of the year, which will provide more details. And as Wendy mentioned, any questions you have, well, hopefully we can answer now. But if not, you see my contact information on the screen, and you see Sam's as well. You can get in touch with us anytime by email, by phone, reach out to us about online voter registration or other issues related to voter registration. So now, Wendy, I'll kick it back to you for any questions.
Thanks very much, Sean. I learned a lot from that presentation, and I look forward to the report when it comes out. We do have a question from another legislative staff person asking if a person is not a driver, how is the ID requirement met online, or is it? And can the applicant complete the form online in that case?
Hi, Wendy. This is Sam. We can say that in the states that have online registration right now, Minnesota is the only state that we're aware of that you can register online without a driver's license or a state identification number. So in order to do the identity verification check, all states with systems currently tie that individual applicant to a record on file with their licensing or identification agency. Most often that's going to be their DMV. Some states are experimenting with ways to broaden that set. They are looking for ways that voters could submit a signature along with a social security number, perhaps. But Minnesota is the only state that has opened it up to individuals that are not currently found in DMV files. You know, we do know that while that does not capture everyone, it does capture an overwhelming majority of citizens in a state. In conversations with states, the states themselves estimate, and this is pretty consistent, that about 90% of their eligible voting population is found within their state motor vehicle agency database. So while that does leave an important 10% out of the process, what we found is that states can then reallocate those resources. Those resources they're saving, both financially and with staff time, can be reallocated to specific voter registration drives to meet those underserved communities. A great example is in Arizona, where the time and money saved by online registration was directed and focused specifically to Native American tribes and to areas that are underserved by the internet. So they were actually able to send election workers out to reservations and register people through paper. And they were able to do that with the resources they saved from online registration. So while not perfect, online registration really does open up a convenient and secure path to registration for a majority of citizens in a state. And those that are not served will hopefully find, the traditional ways of paper will not go away. They'll always have that opportunity, and states should we strongly encourage states to consider, using those resources in ways to reach those underserved communities.
Oh, thank you, Sam. That was great. I would like to go ahead and introduce Matthew Davis, our next presenter. Matt has served as the Information Services Manager for Virginia's State Board of Elections since January 2010, and during that time he has overseen the IT side of things for 30 elections. Basically, he manages all the IT operations and infrastructure for the agency, and that includes application development and support for the statewide voter registration system and also the campaign finance disclosure system. And I learned recently that Matt and his wife are expecting baby number 6 in January, so congratulations to you on that, Matt. Matt, do you want to just go ahead and take it away from there?
Sure. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you all for joining us today. It's a little bit crazy here in Virginia with the snow coming down and a potential recount for our Attorney General's race looming, but I'm glad to be able to share some of our lessons learned in regards to online voter registration security this summer when we implemented our system. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I wanted to first lay out just some of the main concerns that you deal with online voter registration and security. The first is identifying voters. The second is keeping that personal identifying information secure, or PI information secure. Obviously blocking hacking attempts, and then auditing the transactions taking place on your website are of concern. So let's break those down a little bit. In terms of identifying voters, when you put up a system where you have folks looking up their record, in Virginia, we require that they have to enter their date of birth and the locality where they're registered as part of the lookup process, along with a couple of other pieces of information like their full name as they are registered, or their voter identification number, and a last four social if they're providing the name. In our case, if a voter is protected, we simply display a message directing them to contact their local voter registration office. A key decision we made in this process this summer was to not provide any data on the internet related to protected voters. We didn't even want to provide precinct level information for those voters, because you may be able to rat out a safe house, for example, for domestic violence victims by giving somebody the general neighborhood where that house is located. So if somebody's flagged in our system as protected, we simply spit back a message saying, please contact your local voter registration office for more information. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, we talked about the two different options. So in Virginia, you can look up your record using your last four social. They provide their first name, last four social, date of birth, and the locality where they're registered. Or if they want to provide their voter ID, date of birth, and locality where they're registered, they can do a lookup. Then in terms of actually updating or registering to vote, once they come into our system and determine that they need to update their record or want to register for the first time, we require that they provide their full Social Security number. We're one of the few states that's grandfathered in and allows us to collect the full social. They also have to provide their date of birth and their Department of Motor Vehicles customer identifier number, which is found on their license or ID card. We require a full 100% match on those 3 data elements in order for a registration to go through electronically. In addition, we require the DMV system has to kick us back with their electronic signature file. So we have found instances in the DMV data where the data may match, but DMV doesn't have an electronic signature for whatever reason. They may have a data error or they may just not have that information for some reason. So that's just one additional fail-safe we have in place. So we have to have Social Security number, date of birth, and the DMV identifier, as well as an electronic signature in order to proceed with an electronic registration. And one thing I did want to just mention based on some of the questions I've seen, if you do not have a match in our DMV system, in Virginia, we allow you to continue the application process online. However, when you get to the final page, you are given instructions that tell you that you need to print off the PDF version of your application as it's been completed, sign it, and return it to your local registration office. We still capture the data that the voter enters into our system, but it's not flagged as an electronic registration. The locality doesn't process that registration until the piece of paper physically arrives in their hands. On the final review, there is no electronic applications is accepted and approved in Virginia until the appropriate local voter registrar reviews and approves the application. In Virginia, the state is not allowed to make registration decisions. We don't cancel voters. We don't add voters. That responsibility by our Constitution lies within the local general registrars in all of our localities. So we just simply funnel the data to them in hoppers in our voter registration system, and they work their hoppers with the information available to them there. So they get, let's say somebody completes a registration online, everything matches, they get a signature. The locality, when they open up our system, they see, hey, you've got a new electronic registration record. They can pull it up, they can see the signature, they can print off a copy of the application with the signature on it if they want for their paper records, but they're the ones that actually do the processing and accepting of the registration. Anybody who self-admits to us in their process that they're not qualified to vote, for example, when we say, are you a citizen, and they say no, we immediately bounce them into a place that tells them, we're sorry, but in order to apply to register to vote, you must complete the paper application. We don't allow them to move forward in the electronic process at all because we want something in their own handwriting if they're going to attempt to commit a felony. I'm trying not to help them with that process as much as I can. In terms of personal identifying information, just a quick definition on that. Personal identifying information includes any information about an individual that you maintain or collect. This includes the obvious, like Social Security numbers, but it also includes things like IP addresses that are used by your applicants on your website. The key is to protect it. The first thing you can do is to hire security-conscious developers and contractors. You want to make security a top priority of the project from the beginning. You have to encrypt your data. You need to encrypt the data as it's moving between the web and the databases. You also need to encrypt the data that's sitting in your databases. You also want to ensure that permissions on the application, server, and database are set appropriately. This is not so common anymore, but it was really common back in the early days of the web. When you would set up security, somebody could enter something on your website, and the account that actually does the writing, the transaction in the back end would have full edit permissions within the database. And that's how hackers could get into your system. They could take over that account and gain access to your entire back-end database. So you need to make sure those permissions are set properly. You also only want to collect information that you're legally required to collect. We took a stance that if we don't have to ask for it, we don't want to ask for it. For example, I put here, don't ask for your applicant's mother's maiden name. Unless for some reason you are required under your law to ask that, you don't want it. In the event of a security breach, if it happens to you, the less data that gets out, the better it is for everybody, especially the victims. Additionally, you only want to display information on your site that's absolutely necessary. Like I mentioned earlier, we made the decision not to display any information related to protected voters. We also don't display the Social Security number back to the voter. We require the voter to enter it. We give them a chance to validate it, but once they're registered in our system and they look up their record, they at no time ever see their full Social Security number. We never echo that back out to the website. We also you can provide other non-technical alternatives for applicants who do not want to use your system or who do not trust technology. You find those folks everywhere. Some folks just simply aren't going to trust your online registration system, and that's okay, but you don't want to eliminate those old paper systems because those folks are still going to need that opportunity to register. In terms of blocking hackers, there's a couple of things that you can do. One is to throttle your site. One thing we're doing is we restrict the number of requests that an individual client device, be it their mobile phone, their computer, can make on our site over the period of an hour. So for example, if a client device makes 4 lookup attempts on our website in a period of 5 minutes, we may block that computer or that device or IP address for an hour from doing any further lookups. That's just an example. You would have to kind of set and tweak that number based on the activity in your particular state. You may also consider timing how long it takes a user to go through your entire application process. So for example, here, if you have a user who's familiar with your online application, like somebody in your IT shop that built it, if it takes them 25 seconds to complete the process from the time they start until the time they get their final confirmation page, you can actually set up a checkpoint in your process that blocks them from moving any faster than that or flags their record in your system to say, hey, this person completed this application way too fast. That can be a sign that somebody's trying to insert fraudulent records into your system. You can also complicate your form. By complicate your form, I don't mean complicate it from the user perspective, but you don't want to create just a one-page web form. I'm sure all of us have been to a website where we have to fill out like a 20-page application and it's all just one big page where you scroll down and enter each item. Those types of forms are easily hackable. It becomes very easy to write a computer program to populate those fields and hit submit over and over and over again. If you break your application up over, let's say, 5 or 6 pages, it becomes more complicated for just your basement hacker to automatically populate your registration form and submit it. So we break our form up, and it actually becomes more usable, especially on the smaller devices today. For folks like on a mobile phone, they only can see 1 or 2 questions at a time on their screen. So breaking it up makes it a little bit easier for them in the long run. The other key piece is to make sure you're patching your servers and network infrastructure. Make sure your IT folks are monitoring that on a monthly basis and keeping those things patched and cleaned up. And also you need to monitor your logs for suspicious activity. And it's important to keep those logs secure. Logs can contain Social Security numbers, dates of birth, other personal identifying information. And you don't want somebody to steal those. A lot of hack attempts will actually go after the log files because that's where they can find the information that they really want. And then you also want to check your logs to see where the registration is coming from. If you're getting a lot of registrations from Romania, you might need to be a little concerned about what's going on. And in terms of auditing, I say audit everything. So this has been extremely helpful for us in this election. We've had people who have said, well, I registered online, and we've been able to go back and look at the log files and see, well, you did a lookup at 12:39 p.m. on this particular date, but you did not actually submit a registration. And we actually capture the entire registration data set as it comes into our system in a static table. So when it hits that table, it never changes. So we know exactly what the form looked like when the voter hit submit, because we do have a cleanup process of the data that takes place as it moves through our system to do address standardization and things like that. So we make sure we keep that static snapshot of the initial application before any data changes take place. So that's pretty much it on the auditing aspect. My contact information is here. Wendy, do you want me to try to go through some of these questions and answer some of them at this point, or do you want to ask them?
I think I'll pass them out to you, but my first question for you, Matt, is you're clearly into this from a much deeper level than most of us who are on this call. Are you available to talk with us from any state, and you'd share some of this expertise in a more detailed way?
Absolutely.
All right, well, that is quite a wonderful thing for us. If you haven't had an opportunity to submit a question, go to the chat box on the right and type something in. We do have quite a few in the queue, and I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. I'm not sure who's going to be best to answer any of these. We'll just see how that goes. The first one is whether there's any evidence that online registration actually increases voter participation. Is that something you might handle, Sam?
Sure, Wendy. I'd be happy to talk about that. You know, we have not seen any increase in overall participation. It may very well be that online voter registration increases overall participation, but we haven't been able to study that. What we do know is that online voter registration results in cleaner and more accurate records for those voters who do choose to interact with the system. So they are less likely to experience a voter registration problem once they get to the polls. So for those voters, they're more likely to be able to move through the entire voting process without a problem. But as to whether online voter registration actually increases participation, I don't know of any research that's actually been done to say one way or another.
Thank you. I know the turnout. Oh,
sorry, and this is Sean. I just wanted to agree with Sam that right now there's been very little sort of in-depth research about relating turnout to online voter registration. You know, hopefully sometime soon people out there are going to start looking into that, but there's nothing out there yet that we know of.
And this is Matt. I was just going to chime in and say that I don't know about turnout so much, but in Virginia we saw approximately 3,000 online registrations completed through the electronic process on the close of books for this past election, which is a huge number for us, and that was all data that did not have to be keyed in by the localities.
Well, that sounds great. I know that turnout is generally a factor most closely related to weather and not to some of these election administrative policy issues. Next question. Third-party registration drives. These are organizations, perhaps political parties and perhaps community groups that want to go out and gather, help people register to vote. How does online voter registration interact with that? Are states making this easy for them, or is it a tricky thing? Who's going to field that?
Sure. This is Sean. I can talk a little bit about that. We did, in our survey, ask a bit about third-party voter registration groups. And if I remember correctly, 3 or 4 states mentioned specifically that they do, in fact, coordinate with third-party registration groups to have them specifically use online voter registration when they're out doing their drives. So I think it'll benefit both sides. It'll benefit the voters and the groups doing the registering. And then, of course, it'll hopefully make those registrations coming into the office, to elections office, cleaner, easier to use, and more accurate. So we have heard some states specifically reaching out to third-party groups to do some coordination.
And in Virginia, we're actually working through a process right now. We have new legislation that requires third-party registration groups to register with us under some certain caveats in the law. But our goal and hope is to actually be able to issue those groups with a key, basically, that they can use on their website to collect their registration information and submit that directly into our system. And then we'd actually be able to kick back reports to those third-party groups saying, hey, we received this many registrations using your key, and this many of them were successful and this many were not.
Great. All right. Next question. Could the online voter registration systems be tweaked a bit so that they could allow online signature gathering for citizens initiatives and similar petitions? And is this a good idea? How would that work, and is it a good idea?
Wendy, this is Sam from Pew. I think that is a natural progression of what we're seeing. We do not know of any states that are doing that right now. But again, 5 years ago, there were only 2 states in the country that had online voter registration. There is the caveat that in most states, in order to sign a petition, you have to already be a registered voter. So how the functionality of signing a petition would work with a system that was built to register voters would really be up to the technical managers in the states. But we do know that some states are looking at this. We're actually seeing that Utah, for example, again, a conservative state out west, is leading the way. They are very interested in collecting petition signatures electronically. And just earlier this year, there was a Supreme Court case in the state of Utah allowing the collection of electronic petition signatures in some elections. Now, that ruling did not expand to initiatives. It was actually based on, unaffiliated position candidate forms. So it didn't get to that larger initiatives question. But, it is something that we at Pew are going to keep our eyes on, and I'm sure a lot of people around the country. Utah wants to move in that direction. I'm sure that there are other states that want to move in that direction. How those systems would interact with an online voter registration system would really be highly dependent on the state itself and how their systems are built. It's the same thing with how online voter registration interacts with motor vehicles in states right now. It's entirely dependent on state policy and state technological setups. So while I think that is something we are very likely to see in the future, it's not something we're seeing just yet. But again, I am no technical wizard, so I don't want to let anyone think that I have a crystal ball in front of me by any means.
We don't need you to be a technical wizard. We just want you to be a policy geek with the rest of us. Matthew, this question is for you. Why does Virginia request an email address? Is that required under state law? And do other states have that same requirement?
It's not required for registration. It is one of the questions that we've asked on our registration form and our absentee ballot applications for some time. So we provided it here. A number of our registrars, especially some of the newer ones, prefer to communicate with their voters via email. It gives them a written record that they can reference if they need to. And some of our younger voters tend to respond a lot quicker to email questions from their registrars as opposed to phone calls or the snail mail option. In terms of other states, I don't really have any insight there.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Wendy, I can jump in on the other states part. We did actually ask that in our survey, and we found that 10 states do ask for, 10 of the 13 states do ask for an email address in their online system.
Oh, great. That's great information for us. Thank you. Can any of you address whether online voter registration will relate to proof of citizenship requirements such as Kansas and Arizona have?
Hey, Wendy, this is Sam from Pew again. It's a great question. It's something that comes up in every state, and without trying to avoid the question, the answer is really that this is a matter of state policy, and it's going to be based on the citizenship requirements and data that a state already has. So, I think I saw a similar question kind of pop up in the question queue about voter ID requirements and whether or not online voter registration can work in both states with stringent stringent ID requirements or no requirement at all. And if you go back to the map, if you go back to what you saw on the map, both Indiana with a very stringent voter ID law and California with no voter ID law whatsoever have online voter registration. Whether or not a state wants to place a proof of citizenship requirement into that is entirely dependent on the state and could be built. It's certainly possible in the technical build to design that in, but it's going to be heavily dependent on the kind of citizenship information a state already collects. In Arizona, proof of citizenship is let's just say, a newsworthy issue right now. Other states are less secure in the citizenship information they have on file. So it's really dependent on the individual state, the data they already have. But yes, a system certainly could be built to have that check.
In Virginia, we found something really interesting. Our DMV actually has a series of identification cards and licenses they refer to as limited duration licenses, and those are issued to individuals who are known to not be citizens that need a license for a specific reason. For example, folks who work in an embassy in the Virginia area might have a limited duration license. So for those individuals holding a limited duration license in Virginia, we do not allow them to complete the process electronically. Again, just try not to allow somebody to purposely commit fraud has been our goal there.
Great. Another question was about how online voter registration might link into electronic poll books. So if someone could ever so briefly describe what is an electronic poll book and then answer that question, whether it links with online registration.
This is Matt, from Virginia. So electronic poll books are what we use in Virginia, at least to check voters in when they show up at the polls, as opposed to the old paper poll books. In the case of online voter registration in Virginia, the two are not linked together directly. A voter is registered in our system, and the data is extracted from our system to build the electronic poll book files. So there's no direct correlation between the two technologies.
Wonderful. I do still have a few questions, but we're right up against the top of the hour, so I'm going to hold those others and answer them privately on the side. So if you didn't get the answer, I'm sorry at this point, and I will pass them on to the right folks. Mostly I want to say thank you very much to Sam and to Sean and to Matt. If you were here with us in the flesh, we would all be applauding for you at this point, but we can't do that. So just imagine some applause. And with that, I want to thank our participants as well. Thanks for signing on for this. And do feel free to be in touch with any of us, and we will dig deeper on online voter registration as needed. Thank you.